Hello, dear friends. There is a lot of confusion and discredit around the Photon Belt theory due to the fact that dates were given at a time that were not met, as is often the case. But it is possible that it is somewhat right, and I have tried to clarify the concept as best as I can. It is likely that this process is not as sudden as it is said, but rather slow and gradual. This is not a controlled demolition, but rather in a very slow motion, like in Matrix when we see the bullet standing still in the air. It's not a show designed for impatient people, but for calm observers. This is a transition, not a transaction. Opinion piece. Photon Belt transformed the world. Paul Otto Hesse discovered it in 1949. Samael Aun Weor announced it in 1977. Paul Derac and Carl David Anderson studied it. Sheldan, Nidle and Virginia Essene disclosed it in 1994. The channel Discovery Channel talked about it in 2007. The belt orbits around the Pleiades, some Alcyon of the Pleiades. The Earth enters this zone every 10,000 or 11,000 years. Gaia is inviting us to awaken to our spirituality. These electrons would produce an unknown type of energy. It would explain the increase of floods, earthquakes, and droughts. It would be a spiritual cleansing for the planet and humankind. This belt would be the main regulator of galactic change. Photon particles generate invisible high-frequency light. This would be part of the process of returning home to the fifth dimension. Let's start. In 1994, Sheldan, Nidle and Virginia Essene published a famous book entitled "You Are Becoming a Galactic Human," which hypothesized that the entire solar system was going to pass through a high-energy zone called the Photon Belt that was going to produce profound spiritual transformations in humankind and our entire planet. They were not the first to put forward this hypothesis, but they were the first to spread it, since the book spread like wildfire in alternative spiritual circles. Even the famous channel Discovery Channel talked about it in 2007 under the title "A Perfect Disaster." Sheldan, Nidle states that the new era could be the end of times mentioned in the Bible, in different religions, and in the prophecies of indigenous peoples, which will bring our ascension and transformation to a superior human being fully aware of his participation as a legitimate member of the Galactic Federation. The Photon Belt, also known as Photon Ring, Manasic Ring, Photon Band, Photon Belt or Golden Nebula, is a belief linked to the new spirituality that holds that our solar system is passing through a massive network of some kind of cosmic radiation. Scientifically, it is proven that when an antiparticle is formed, it pops into existence in a universe of ordinary particles, which in a fraction of a second meet and collide with an electron. The electric charge is cancelled, and the total mass of the particle is converted into energy in the form of photons. The core of Photon Belt believes would be that of a huge photon belt exits and orbits around the Pleiades, a cluster of stars located about 440 light years away from Earth, composed of about 500 stars. Note: according to this hypothesis, the Earth would already be crossing this belt, resulting in the elevation of humankind to a higher plane of existence. As far as human beings are concerned, a generalized crisis would be expressed originated in the blindness of the minds that own the materialistic complex, desirous of imposing their dominion over all the peoples of the earth. The photonic belt would already be affecting the electric, magnetic and gravitational fields of the earth, causing important changes in the planet's temperature, increase of floods, earthquakes, plagues and famine. Origin of the concept. The German writer Paul Otto Hesse described these beliefs about the impact of the photon belt on planet Earth in 1949 with the book The Last Day. According to Paul Otto Hesse's research, the thickness of the photon belt would be 2000 solar years. It is to say, the time it would take for the solar system to pass throughout it. Subsequently, the Englishman Paul Derac and the Nobel Prize winner in physics Carl David Anderson furthered their studies. This concept was promoted in 1977 by the Colombian master Samael Aun Weor, called, his original name was Victor Manuel Gómez Rodríguez, with his lecture The Rings of Alcione, in which he quoted Hesse when he predicted that if the Earth enters the belt first, a great fire would form in the sky, while if the Sun enters first, the radiation released could interfere with the Sun's rays and darkness would reign for 5 days, after which everything would return to normal. Samael refers to the photon belt as the Rings of Alcione. Alcyone, according to him, would be the central sun of the Pleiades. In quotes, Alcyone is precisely the main sun of the Pleiades, and in its orbit 7 suns gravitate, and our sun would be the star of the 7 orbital suns of Alcyone. This author states that Alcyone has rings of radiation caused by the splitting of electrons, which release the energy that Samael calls manasik, a Sanskrit term for mind. The electrons, Samael said, will produce an unknown type of energy. In August 1981, the Australian International UFO Flying Saucer Research Magazine number 12, in an article entitled The Alcione Photon Belt Saga by Shirley Kemp, also mentions the photon belt, and José Comas y Solá, Friedrich Wilhelm Bessel, Isaac Asimov, Edmund Halley, Paul Otto Hesse, and Erich von Däniken. It was reprinted in Nexus magazine in Australia in February in 1991 as the Photon Belt Story. Beliefs. His followers hold a number of general beliefs. First, the photon belt orbits around Alcyone, which is the brightest star in the Pleiades open cluster. Second, Our solar system orbits around this star. Third, when the Earth enters the Photon Belt, all the kinds of disturbances such as earthquakes, droughts, floods, etc. will occur. Fourth, this period would be a spiritual cleansing for the planet and humankind, and possibly the beginning of a new golden age. Fifth, the Earth would enter the Photon Belt once every 10,000 or 11,000 years. Sixth, none of the proponents of this idea clearly state what kind of radiation the Photon Belt would produce, but they talked about magnetic flux or light, high frequency invisible light, high frequency energy photon particles, etc. Seventh, similarly, none of them seem to agree on when the solar system would enter the Photon Belt or exactly how long the Earth would remain within the influence of this powerful energy. Definition: a photon belt would be a set of cosmic emanations of light of high frequency and purity, which behaves as a pathway throughout with which galactic information runs, and where everything is transformed and elevated to higher vibratory frequencies. It is currently known that there are multiple photonic belts elliptical in shape, like rings perpendicular to the plane constituted by the component stars of the Milky Way. A photon light particle would be a quantum of electromagnetic energy without mass or electric charge, which has been called tachyon energy, product of the collision of an electron and an antielectron, or of a proton with an antiproton, whose result would be that the mass is totally converted into energy in the form of light particles. Photons act on the electrons of the electromagnetic, atomic, molecular, cellular, and tissue structures that in living organisms receive and interpret electromagnetic signals, inducing very precise energetic changes in them, which translate into the production and storage of heat and light, mechanical and biochemical transformations, alterations in the spatial configuration of crystals and molecules, changes in their frequency, etc. Its specific frequency as an electromagnetic language and its wavelength as a substrate carrier of information accesses the vibratory codes of these systems, allowing to create specific changes in biological systems through processes that involve a great energetic economy thanks to the law of resonance. Sheldan Nidle explains that the purpose of the photon belt is to act as the main regulator for galactic change, coordinating its movements from within the galactic center with a natural energy cycle. At regular intervals, this center expels a huge wave of energy, extremely intense, which is intercepted and transmuted by the photon belt. If required, this energy causes stars to go nova, planets to change their orbit or even their very nature. It is to say, their atmospheric volume, becoming arid, semi-arid, or watery planets. Therefore, the divine plan of each galaxy carries out the propagation of physical life and its carefully controlled evolution. Everything in creation obeys the sacred decrees of its specific divine plan, which is monitored by the spiritual hierarchy of a galaxy. To achieve this, heaven forms innumerable orders, councils, and administrations. A photon belt regulates these waves moving on a fixed pattern set by how the galactic center operates. In its particular case, the Milky Way galaxy runs in cycles of approximately 13,000 and 26,000 years. The photon belt rotates around the center according to this pattern. Each emission of energy from the galaxy's center varies in intensity and in the spatial pattern, because it needs to affect each section of the galaxy in a specific way. This energy leaves behind a special pattern that encodes each section of the galaxy with a different schedule. It is to say, the way each star, each planet, each dust cloud, and so on will react and carry out its part of the divine plan. Each aspect of a galaxy also possesses a timetable for its unique unfolding. These events form the very nature of the physical world. Physical creation has a divine pattern that is set, in every sense, by the divine plan. Consider how detailed this plan is. Every sentient being in creation, be it a planet, a star, or even yourselves, possesses such a plan. They all blend together carefully in perfect succession. Each reality has the potential to form the subsets needed to manifest a greater reality. Surrounding them are billions of other galaxies that possess a form either quite similar to or very different from our own. Imagine how rich are the experiences contained within that enormous mix. Consequences. According to some modern spiritual beliefs, the photonic belt represents the approach of a new golden age and the beginning of a new cycle where energetic changes occur that will mark the path of the current civilization towards spirituality and expansion of consciousness. In the book The Photonic Belt, its author, Jaime Arroyo, says that in the last decades the Earth's magnetic field has been gradually decreasing almost to zero. As a consequence of the pressure exerted by the photonic belt, from the point of view of health, this implies that the Earth's magnetic induction lines are weaker and slower, leading to the stagnation of energies in the human body, giving opportunity to the increase of diseases such as cancer, AIDS, tumors in general, and transforming the structure of DNA in the human species. Since all atoms and molecules will change, all human beings will experience many modifications in nature itself. Likewise, it will happen with all the atoms of the earth, which will allow us to draw back the veil of consciousness around us, thus beginning the process of returning home, to the fifth dimension, to a golden age prophesied by various sources during the last 2,000 years. It would be a time when humankind would understand the true story of planet Earth and recover the faculties of consciousness lost during the last 5,200 years of the enchantment of the Mayan dream. To that magical flight would join, by means of previous incarnation, all the deceased in any epoch, who are in the fourth dimension, also called Paradise. So it could be the moment of the resurrection of the dead, symbolically mentioned in the Bible. According to the galactic Mayans, the beings who wish to remain attached to the world forms would suffer an involution, which would imply a chronic deterioration of the bodily forms and an accelerated increase of deaths, because the soul would withdraw from the bodies controlled by minds that were not able to understand their life mission. However, all beings who disincarnated during these events would have the opportunity to return to a new body to enter more consciously into the evolutionary process. Those who fail to consciously contact the fourth dimension or the plane of the soul would continue their evolutionary process on other planets of the universe, where they are vibrating in the third dimension on the plane of attachments, possessions, conquests, laws and rules. As a spirit is eternal, the above should not sound like punishment or blackmail, but universal law. Key moment. Our solar system would have entered Photon Belt, which is a key moment for humanity. Together, new ways of seeing and creating life are activated in us. Let us remember that in these times a lot of energy is entering the Earth and a lot of information. The Earth began to enter the Photon Belt and began to integrate energy and information. This generated an acceleration of the evolution of the consciousness of the human beings since about 60 years ago, and it intensified even more since 2008. Gaia invites us to awaken our spirituality, to be aware of all that we really are. The solar system is passing through a region of the Milky Way full of cosmic rays and interstellar clouds. The magnetic field of our sun, inflated by the solar wind into a bubble called the heliosphere, protects us from these things. However, the bubble itself is vulnerable to external fields. A strong magnetic field just outside the solar system could put pressure on the heliosphere and interact with it in unknown ways. We are also experiencing a major culmination of cycles as we align with the galactic center and encounter amazing cosmological and astrological alignments. Original theory. Paul Otto Hesse also made a special study of the Pleiades system, confirming that our sun is part of it. He found, for example, that our astro king takes 24,000 years to complete one orbit around Alcyon. He divided that cycle into two stages of periods of 12,000 years each. A period of 12,000 years of darkness, which we are now ending, followed by a period of 12,000 years of light, to again incur 12,000 years of darkness and 12,000 years of light, and so on. Hesse also discovered that Alcyon has around itself a gigantic ring of disk of the radiation in a transverse position to the plane of the orbits of the suns of its systems, including ours, and that this ring has an effective range of 2000 solar light years. From the above, it is deduced that each of the suns of this system has to cross this ring or disk of radiation in its time. The speed of each sun is different, and therefore it takes different times to cross the ring. In the case of our sun, it would take about 2000 years to cross it. This ring, according to Hesse, would be formed by the decomposition, splitting or breaking of the electron, something that to this day is still unknown on Earth. When penetrating our planet in this radiation, all molecules and atoms of all existing bodies will be excited, undergoing a transformation of unpredictable magnitude. The aforementioned molecular excitation would create a type of constant, not heated light, a light without temperature that would not produce shadow, in such a way that even in the deepest caverns there would be no darkness, and in our human interior there would be no darkness either. Everything, absolutely all the material in its exterior and interior, would be illuminated without shadows from the moment in which our world penetrated fully into the Photon Belt. The way to the Pleiades. A photon belt was discovered in outer space in 1961 by means of the nascent satellite instruments. We are currently moving toward the Pleiades, the seven sisters, of which there are 8, some 400 light years from Earth. This group of stars is the basis for the mythology of many peoples, including the Greek gods, the Australian Dream Age, Chinese mythology, etc. Over time, several famous astronomers have made detailed studies and calculations about the Pleiades, having concluded that they are a system of suns located in the constellation Taurus, and that they revolve around Alcyon, the largest and brightest star of the group. For example, José Comas Solas made a special study of the Pleiades and discovered that they form a system of which our sun is also part, as well as some other suns, all with their own planetary systems. In the early 17th century, the English astronomer Sir Edmund Halley, studying the position of the stars, noticed that at least 3 of them were not in the position recorded by the Greeks. The difference was so great that it made it unlikely that the great Greek masters had made a mistake. It seemed very clear to Halley that these stars had moved within the system. Mayan tradition. Proponents of the idea, following a theory first proposed by Munro Edmondson, claimed that the Maya based their calendar on observations of the so-called Great Dark Rift, fissure, or cleft, a band of dark dust clouds in the Milky Way, which according to some scholars the Maya called the Shilaba B or Black Road. John Mayer Jenkins claims that the Maya were aware of where the ecliptic intersected the Black Path and gave this position in the sky special significance in their cosmology. Jenkins said that precession would align the sun precisely with the galactic equator at the winter solstice of 2012. Jenkins claimed that the classical Maya anticipated this conjunction and celebrated it as the harbinger of a profound spiritual transition for humanity. Proponents of the New Age galactic alignment hypothesis argued that just as astrology uses the positions of the stars and planets to make claims of future events, the Maya plotted their calendars in order to prepare for significant world events. Jenkins attributed the ancient Maya shamans' ideas about the galactic center to their use of psilocybin mushrooms, psychoactive toadstools, and other dangerous psychedelics. Jenkins also associated Xibalba with a world tree, based on the studies of contemporary Mayan cosmology. Geomagnetic reversal. Another idea involves a geomagnetic reversal, often referred to as a pole shift, possibly triggered by a massive solar flare, which would release energy equivalent to 100 billion atomic bombs. A solar maximum would block satellite communications and cell phones. This belief was supported by observations that the Earth's magnetic field was awakening, which could precede a reversal of the north and south magnetic poles and the arrival of the next solar maximum. However, most scientific estimates calculate that geomagnetic reversals take between 1,000 and 10,000 years to complete and do not begin on any particular date. Gradual entry. Entry into this belt would be gradual, although I believe we are already partially inside. First, we would enter an Alcyon, which would take approximately 2 days to enter a zone in which the darkness would be total and would last 3 days, where electrical appliances wouldn't work, product of the excess of existing magnetism, and then enter the major part, where we would experience endless light 24 hours a day for 2,000 years, and it would end when the solar system would live again for another period of 5 to 6 days to enter a new period of darkness, which is what we observe today, that is, day and night. This space event would produce many changes in the manifestations of life, just as it has happened at other times in our history. For example, glaciations and other cataclysms that have modified the geography of the planet, since it seems that the Alcyon ring would bring great benefits, but also serious alterations, at least at the beginning. In the Earth, where if the Earth were to enter the ring before the Sun, there would be an atmospheric phenomenon similar to a fire both of the sky and of the whole planet, but there wouldn't be heat nor would it harm anyone, since it will be a phenomenon only for the sight, for the senses, although alterations would be observed in the matter, which would appear luminous, perhaps phosphorescent. On the other hand, in the case that the Sun would enter first in this belt, a darkness would be produced on the Earth as of night, with rain of stars that would last 5 days. Then the Earth would suffer the phenomenon already described to remain with permanent light during 2,000 years. The darkness mentioned would be a consequence of the sudden modification that the solar radiation would undergo by the contact with the photonic ring. The rain of stars in the second case would be a consequence of the extraordinary molecular excitation in the atmosphere. The 2,000-year perpetual day would be a consequence of the radiation itself no longer depending on the sun for daylight, said Benavides in 1990. It is very likely that the Earth's rotation would slow down a bit. This would be because due to the reduction of solar radiation, it is expected that the temperature would become colder, and that the ice sheets would extend to latitude 40 degrees in both hemispheres, leaving the areas near the equator as a habitable region with a temperate climate. However, the equatorial line would probably not be what it is today, because the entry of the Earth in the Rings of Alcione would produce a change in the inclination of the polar axis, placing it in a vertical position with respect to the ecliptic. History books report that there have been at least 4 recorded ice ages, and they seem to last about 2,000 years. But this is all hypothesized by different authors, so nothing is set in stone. Thanks a lot, dear friends.